Short rest intervals feel productive because they increase fatigue quickly, but this creates a misunderstanding between effort and effectiveness. Muscle growth is strongly linked to total training volume, which is the product of sets, reps, and load. When rest periods are too short, your ability to sustain that volume decreases across sets. The limiting factor becomes fatigue, not muscular capacity. To understand this, consider ATP resynthesis. ATP is the immediate energy source for muscular contractions, and it takes time to replenish after each set. If you begin the next set before ATP levels recover sufficiently, your performance drops, meaning fewer reps or lower load. A study published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research by Brad Schoenfeld compared short rest intervals around 1 minute with longer rest intervals around 3 minutes. The group using longer rest achieved significantly greater increases in muscle strength and hypertrophy. One conclusion states, quote, longer rest periods allowed for greater volume load, which contributed to superior hypertrophic adaptations, end quote. This is a key point because volume load is one of the strongest drivers of muscle growth. When rest is too short, volume decreases even if the workout feels harder. In practical terms, this means your first set may be strong, but each subsequent set declines sharply. Over the course of a session, the total effective stimulus is reduced. You are working harder in terms of perceived effort, but achieving less in terms of mechanical output. This creates a false sense of productivity while limiting actual progress. The insight here is that fatigue is not the goal. Stimulus is the goal. Proper rest allows you to maintain performance across sets, which increases total volume and leads to better adaptation over time. If this changes how you think about rest in your training, take a moment to subscribe and like, because the next layer will show how short rest directly reduces your strength output even within a single workout. The primary system responsible for short duration, high intensity effort is the phosphocreatine system. This system rapidly regenerates ATP, which fuels each repetition. However, phosphocreatine stores are limited and must be restored after each set. This restoration is not immediate. It follows a time-dependent curve. Research in exercise physiology shows that phosphocreatine stores recover to about 70% within 30 seconds, around 85 to 90% after 1 minute, and can take up to 3 to 5 minutes to fully replenish. One review states, quote, phosphocreatine resynthesis is largely complete within 3 to 5 minutes following high-intensity exercise, end quote. This means that if you rest only 30 to 60 seconds, you are starting your next set with a partially depleted energy system. The result is a direct reduction in force output. In practical terms, this explains why your second or third set feels significantly weaker when rest is short. You are not fully recovered at the cellular level, so your muscles cannot generate the same level of tension. This leads to fewer repetitions, reduced load, or both. Over multiple sets, this compounds into a substantial decrease in total training stimulus. There is also a neural component. The nervous system requires time to recover its ability to recruit high threshold motor units, which are the fibers most responsible for strength and hypertrophy. When rest is insufficient, these motor units are not fully engaged in subsequent sets. This shifts the workload toward lower threshold fibers, which are less effective for building muscle size. The key insight is that rest is not passive time. It is active preparation for the next stimulus. When you shorten rest too much, you are not increasing intensity, you are decreasing capacity. Understanding this allows you to align rest intervals with your goal, which is to produce the highest quality output in every set rather than simply finishing the workout faster. Short rest increases metabolic stress, which creates a strong burning sensation and a feeling of intensity. This leads many people to believe they are stimulating more growth. However, hypertrophy is primarily driven by mechanical tension, not by how much discomfort you feel. When rest is too short, the balance shifts away from tension and toward fatigue, which changes the quality of the stimulus. Mechanical tension refers to the force produced by muscle fibers when lifting a load. This tension is what activates key growth pathways such as mTOR and stimulates muscle protein synthesis. Metabolic stress, on the other hand, is associated with the accumulation of byproducts like lactate and hydrogen ions. While metabolic stress can contribute to hypertrophy, it is not as potent or reliable as mechanical tension. A review in Sports Medicine explains that mechanical tension is the primary driver of muscle growth, while metabolic stress plays a secondary role. One statement summarizes, quote, "Mechanical tension is considered the main stimulus for muscle hypertrophy," end quote. When rest periods are too short, fatigue accumulates quickly, and your ability to produce high force declines. This means each repetition is performed with less tension, even if the effort feels high. The muscle is working hard, but not optimally. Over time, this leads to a training style that prioritizes exhaustion over effective stimulus. This is similar to trying to build strength while constantly lifting lighter weights to failure instead of progressively increasing load. You feel tired, but the signal for growth is weaker. The body adapts specifically to the type of stress it receives. If the dominant stress is fatigue rather than tension, the adaptation will reflect that. The key insight is that intensity should be defined by output, not by discomfort. Short rest increases how hard the workout feels, but it reduces how effective each set is for building muscle. Understanding this distinction allows you to train with purpose rather than chasing fatigue as a proxy for progress. Muscle growth requires a gradual increase in training demand over time. This can come from lifting heavier weights, performing more repetitions, or increasing total volume. However, all of these depend on your ability to perform at a high level consistently across sessions. When rest is too short, fatigue accumulates and limits your capacity to express strength. This makes progression unstable or even impossible. A meta-analysis in Sports Medicine examining rest intervals found that longer rest periods, typically 2 to 3 minutes or more, led to greater strength gains compared to shorter rest periods. One conclusion states, quote, "Longer rest intervals are more effective for maximizing strength development due to improved performance across sets," end quote. Strength is not only a goal on its own, it is also a tool for hypertrophy. The stronger you become, the more mechanical tension you can apply to the muscle over time. When rest is insufficient, each session becomes inconsistent. Some days you perform well, other days fatigue dominates early. This variability makes it difficult to track progression or apply overload in a structured way. Over weeks, this leads to stagnation. You may feel like you are working hard, but the numbers do not move. This is often misinterpreted as a genetic limitation or a plateau that requires changing exercises or programs, when in reality, the issue is inadequate recovery between sets. There is also a psychological effect. When performance drops due to fatigue, motivation can decline because effort is not translating into measurable improvement. This creates a disconnect between input and output. The key insight is that rest supports progression. It allows you to repeat high-quality efforts, which is necessary for increasing load and volume over time. Without sufficient rest, progressive overload breaks down. If this helps you see why rest is a performance tool rather than wasted time, take a moment to subscribe and like, because the next section will challenge a common myth about hormones and short rest. It is true that shorter rest can lead to higher acute spikes in certain hormones during and immediately after a workout. However, the critical mistake is assuming that these short-term fluctuations directly translate into long-term muscle growth. Research has consistently shown that these acute hormonal increases are not strongly correlated with hypertrophy outcomes. A review in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research examined this relationship and concluded that post-exercise increases in anabolic hormones do not reliably predict muscle growth. It summarizes, quote, "Acute elevations in anabolic hormones are not significantly associated with increases in muscle hypertrophy," end quote. This means that chasing a hormonal spike by reducing rest is not an effective strategy for building muscle. The body's growth process is driven more by local factors within the muscle, such as mechanical tension and muscle protein synthesis signaling, rather than temporary systemic hormone changes. While hormones like testosterone do play an important role, their baseline levels and long-term regulation matter far more than short-lived spikes during a single session. Short rest creates a strong metabolic and hormonal response, which feels productive, but if it reduces performance and total volume, the net effect can be negative for hypertrophy. This is a classic example of confusing a visible signal with a meaningful outcome. The spike is measurable, but it is not the main driver of adaptation. The key insight is that effective training is not about maximizing temporary internal reactions, but about creating consistent and progressive mechanical stimulus over time. When rest is too short, you may increase the hormonal response in the moment, but you reduce the quality of the stimulus that actually drives growth. Understanding this helps you avoid chasing short-term signals at the expense of long-term progress. When rest is too short, fatigue is not only muscular, it is also neurological. The nervous system becomes less precise in coordinating movement, which directly affects exercise execution. This is critical because muscle growth depends on applying tension to the intended muscle, not just completing the movement. When technique degrades, tension is redistributed to other muscles or reduced altogether. Fatigue alters motor control. As energy levels drop and the nervous system becomes stressed, your ability to stabilize joints and maintain proper movement patterns declines. A biomechanics review in the Journal of Sports Sciences notes that fatigue can significantly alter movement mechanics and increase variability in joint positioning. One summary states, quote, "Fatigue leads to decreased neuromuscular control and altered movement patterns," end quote. This means that even if you complete the same number of repetitions, the quality of those repetitions is lower. In practical terms, this shows up as shorter range of motion, uncontrolled tempo, or compensatory movements. For example, during a squat, the hips may shift, or the lower back may take more load. During a pressing movement, the shoulders may compensate for fatigued chest muscles. Over time, this reduces the stimulus on the target muscle and increases stress on joints and connective tissue. There is also an injury risk component. As coordination declines, the margin for error increases. Small deviations in form that would normally be corrected become more pronounced under fatigue. This is especially relevant in compound movements where multiple joints and muscle groups must work together. The key insight is that quality of execution determines quality of stimulus. Short rest may allow you to complete a workout faster, but it often reduces the precision and effectiveness of each repetition. Over time, this leads to less muscle growth and a higher risk of setbacks. Proper rest supports not only strength output, but also movement quality, which is essential for consistent progress. The problem is not short rest itself, but using it in situations where it does not match the goal. Short rest intervals can be effective when the objective is metabolic stress, muscular endurance, or time-efficient training. They are also useful for isolation exercises where the absolute load is lower and the risk of technique breakdown is reduced. For example, in exercises like lateral raises, bicep curls, or cable movements, the limiting factor is often local muscle fatigue rather than systemic fatigue. In these cases, shorter rest periods of 30 to 90 seconds can still allow sufficient performance while increasing metabolic stress. Training guidelines from organizations like the American College of Sports Medicine note that moderate rest intervals can be appropriate for hypertrophy, particularly when combined with moderate loads and controlled volume. One guideline states, quote, "Shorter rest intervals may be used for hypertrophy training depending on exercise selection and intensity," end quote. There is also a role for short rest in advanced techniques such as supersets or drop sets. These methods intentionally increase fatigue to extend the stimulus within a limited time frame. However, they're typically used as supplements to primary training, not as the foundation. The main compound lifts, where the greatest mechanical tension is generated, still benefit from longer rest periods to maintain performance. The key distinction is between primary and secondary stimulus. Short rest can enhance certain aspects of training, but it should not replace the conditions needed for high tension output. When used strategically, it adds variety and efficiency. When overused, it limits progress. The insight here is not to avoid short rest, but to place it correctly within your program. Understanding when it helps and when it hinders allows you to use it as a tool rather than a default approach. There is no single perfect rest time, but there is an optimal range depending on whether your priority is strength, hypertrophy, or endurance. For compound movements like squats, deadlifts, presses, and rows, longer rest intervals are generally more effective because they allow full or near full recovery of the energy systems and nervous system. This supports higher force output, better technique, and greater total volume. Guidelines from the American College of Sports Medicine recommend rest periods of around 2 to 3 minutes or longer for multi-joint exercises when the goal is strength and hypertrophy. One position stand states, quote, "Longer rest intervals are recommended for exercises requiring high levels of strength and power to maintain performance across sets," end quote. In contrast, shorter rest intervals of 30 to 90 seconds can be used for isolation exercises or when targeting muscular endurance, where the load is lower and the coordination demands are reduced. The key is alignment. If your goal is to maximize muscle growth, your training should prioritize mechanical tension, sufficient volume, and consistent progression. Rest is the factor that allows all three to occur. Without enough rest, tension drops, volume decreases, and progression becomes inconsistent. With appropriate rest, each set becomes an opportunity to apply a high-quality stimulus. There is also a practical layer. Many people shorten rest to save time, but this often reduces effectiveness. A better approach is to structure workouts efficiently while still allowing adequate recovery for key lifts. This might mean prioritizing compound movements with longer rest and using shorter rest for accessory work. When used correctly, it enhances performance, supports progression, and improves results. If this helped you rethink how you structure your workouts, take a moment to subscribe and like, because understanding these details is what separates effort from actual progress.